your mind can't comprehend all the technology that goes into making a diaper. It's kind of exciting.
So I did hear some rumblings of a poop fart classification.
How can you tell from sensor data whether somebody has defecated in a disposable article or if it's a fart? You think, well, that's easy. Well, no, it's not necessarily if you have a very low cost sensor. I was actually asked to look at the data on this.
Hopefully not too close at the data.
Well, fortunately, it was just the data, not the raw data.
So, Walter, welcome to the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast. It's obviously your first appearance, but I'm really grateful we got to know each other a little better over the last couple of days here at the Kaggle Days World Championship. Since you are a first-time guest, and when I have in-person guests, I generally let them do the introduction because awkwardly I would mess it up if I did it. What would you like people to know about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Walter Reade. It's Reade if you want to look me up. And I am a data scientist. I've been a data scientist officially for 5 years, but kind of doing data science machine learning for about 10 now. And so I work at Kaggle and I prepare competitions that other people get to enjoy competing in. So that's what I do for my day job.
Amazing. And so you were competing on Kaggle and then you eventually started working for Kaggle, correct?
It was Kaggle that got me interested in data science and machine learning. And I'll tell a little bit about that story once we get into that. I realized I thought I was good at data analytics and I entered my first Kaggle competition and realized I wasn't so good. That kind of got me hooked in the whole journey, and it turned out to be a very good time. So learning everything I could, and 5 years of that, and then became a professional data scientist.
Amazing. So where did that entire journey start? Where did you first get interested in data to begin with?
So it was actually less about data and more about computers. So I'm a pretty old guy. I grew up in the 80s, and it's hard for people who are younger to understand what life was like before modern computation. But my first computer, I kid you not, had 2 kilobytes of RAM. 2 kilobytes. I learned, basic. I took a Pascal class in high school. In college, learned Fortran 77. That was kind of the hot language. I've been around for a while, but it was useful. Ended up doing a master's and a PhD, both of which I got to use a Fortran to do coding. So got really interested in computation, and I think that naturally leads to data, machine learning.
And what
analysis.
do you compute?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Versus, right, some people come into from the stats and the numbers, and they get into data science and machine learning. For me, it was more about the computation. My PhD was in fluid dynamics and doing direct numerical simulation. So I found machine learning was not directly related, but a lot of the same skills and lots of fun problems.
Amazing. So from, maybe towards the end of your PhD to your career at Kaggle now, how did you make that progression? What was it like landing your first job? What was it like to, start working on Kaggle and then eventually land this role? Yeah.
So I would say anyone who's interested in data science and machine, this is kind of a life lesson. I graduated from high school in 1987, and everyone I knew was going into computer science or computers or whatnot. And I thought, by the time I graduate, all of the jobs are going to be taken. And of course, that's ridiculous now, right? Because, the jobs still aren't taken. So, my sense is there's people that think, the data science explosion is over and the growth has slowed. So maybe if I go to school and data science, which I'm really interested in, by the time I'm done, there won't be any jobs. I would say if you're interested, if it's a passion for you, if you enjoy do it, just do it. It's hard to imagine a time where the world won't need talented data scientists, machine learning people who know how to analyze data. So so that life lesson.
Well, I think to just piggyback on that for a second, that's something I pay particular attention to. I mean, you're working at Google, you're at essentially the cutting edge of machine learning, and you guys are still hiring people, right?
Right.
There's so many companies that are just starting to hit the wave of essentially needing more data practitioners. There's been this boom of data engineering right now because companies didn't have proper infrastructure to support the data scientists that they hired accidentally before they had the infrastructure. And now there's this new boom of data science hiring as so many of these companies that are lagging a little bit start to have the need for these data scientists. And I think that people don't realize that all these companies don't arrive at data maturity at the same time. It's like a slow cascading effect that could take some companies maybe 2-3 years, some companies maybe 25 years. And so it's not like these jobs are all going to be sucked up at one time. It's this moving wave of these continuous jobs that are going to be coming over time.
Yeah, that's a great point. Particularly what I would call the traditional companies, the ones that were around before the internet. The first two companies I worked for were 100-plus-year-old companies, and they are still trying to figure out data science and machine learning. Now, the irony is they're awash in data. They have huge amounts of data. They don't know what to do with it. They don't have the talent. They don't know how to hire the talent. So that's part of the frustration, I think, for a lot of younger data scientists is they get to a company and the company doesn't know what to do with them. But yeah, you're right, decades before that's even settled out.
Amazing. So I apologize, went on a little tangent there, but so you were talking about that those first companies that you landed and that early maybe misconception that you had. How did that bleed into the rest of your career there?
So I got my PhD in chemical engineering and I went into traditional industry. My first job was drying cardboard. I was a pulp and paper air and drying systems engineer. Did that for a few years, and then I kind of upgraded to something a little bit more interesting. Diaper manufacturing or nappy manufacturing for people outside the U.S. I am a huge fan of manufacturing. It's super interesting, and there's machine learning and AI has a huge role to play in that now and in the future. But I did that for about 15 years without growing my professional skills in terms of analytics, data science, but still within the space I was working in, still was pretty good comparatively. And that's when I discovered Kaggle. So it was 2012. So I'm a chemical engineer. I did a lot of data analysis, but not super sophisticated stuff. And there was this Merck molecular challenge activity that was hosted on Kaggle. It was a top prize was $25,000. And I thought, I kid you not, I thought this is going to be the easiest $25,000 I ever made in my life. So I entered the competition and just got destroyed. There were 330 teams and I came in like 12th from the bottom, like really bad. And, on the one hand, that was super discouraging. On the other hand, that is kind of just like, wow, there's this whole new field. Again, this is 2012, this whole new field that's kind of exploding that I just had a blind spot for. So that got me really hooked on learning everything I could about data science, machine learning. The other thing that was interesting is Coursera came out about that same time. So all of a sudden there's all of these resources that weren't available. Again, people that were born after YouTube and the internet don't realize how hard it was to get technical information. If you wanted to learn about neural networks, the first class I took about neural networks was a distance ed class in 2002, where they mailed you physical DVDs and you watched them on your computer or whatever, the professor, and then you emailed the homework. There's like so much. That's why I say if you're interested in it, go for it, because the sky's the limit.
Well, there's so many different ways that you can learn something now. I find that really beautiful. I remember when I was in high school taking like pre-cal, right? We had one textbook. That was essentially the only way I was learning that information. And if that didn't resonate with me, that's it. Now I have my stats textbook. I have supplementary material. I can go on YouTube and watch a video. I could take an online course. I can go to Khan Academy. I can find something that actually works and resonates for me. I mean, that's something that I'm eternally grateful for now. I mean, when I started learning data science, it was just at the beginning of that boom of multiple resources for a single discipline. And I certainly would not have been able to learn the field the way I have without that diversity. Because there were some resources I'd watch and I'm like, or listen to or read, and I'd be like, I'm putting this down immediately. It's putting me to sleep. And then other ones where I'm like, this is incredible. And
there's this quote. It's my favorite quote. It's by a guy, Alvin Toffler. He's written some books, like a futurist. The quote I love, it says, the illiterate of the 21st century aren't those who can't read and write. They are those who can't learn, unlearn, and then relearn. And that is true. That is the skill that differentiates people. It's not whether you can learn, especially in the field of machine learning, data science, numerics. You have to, right? You got to keep relearning. And the people, so if you can learn to enjoy that, learn to, maybe if you don't enjoy it, but you still want to do it, so you create a system for yourself, that's how people keep up. That's the literacy that we need.
I love that quote. First time I've heard it, actually, but it resonates so much with me. I mean, from all the data scientists that I talk to, one resounding theme that I hear about success in the field is if you're willing to continually learn and continually improve yourself, because this field does not stand still by any stretch of the imagination. And you know that better than anyone else, right?
Yeah, it's right. I've been in the field for 10 years now, and it is still intimidating, waking up, like overwhelming at times.
Yeah. So a short sidebar, how do you deal with that the field is overwhelming? It's growing so fast. There's so much innovation. Is the goal to just try to keep up? Or is it to say, hey, these are things that are relevant to me, and learn? What is your approach to that?
Yeah. I think I've done it both ways. The kind of the random walk way, and that is fun in some sense, but it's not the best way. I really strongly believe that you have to be thoughtful and purposeful, in the sense that number one, you realize you can't learn it all. You won't learn it all. So don't try to learn it all. Second thing is decide, okay, well then what do you learn and focus on? And to me, I do think you have to decide, right? This is where it becomes personal. You have to decide what your need is. I personally spend the majority of time on the things that, say 60% of the time on the things that are of use right now, of practice, like just improving Python skills, scikit-learn, all of the things, like even pandas, like those basics, core skills, I spend a considerable amount of time trying to improve. Then the other 30% is what's kind of on the cutting edge, like something that's new, that has proven itself, like, oh yeah, this is going to stick. And then I spend that last 10%, okay, what's all the crazy fun stuff out there? Then I'm going to read fairly superficially and just keep an eye on. If it starts to stick, then it goes in that 30%. I might learn a little bit deeper, but I don't try to learn everything really deep.
So your focus is kind of on the stage where it's made it past research papers, right? You're not reading the first edition. You're saying, okay, people are implementing this in Kaggle competitions and they're doing well. Probably about time I pick it up. Not like hot off the press, this new model, whatever it might be.
No, I mean, at best, I read the abstract and go, oh, cool. What? I mean, if you think about all of the hot new, oh my gosh, this is amazing things that have done nothing over the years, that's all wasted time and energy. So I do wait for basically whatever my network is to kind of filter and curate the things that probably need a little bit more attention.
I like that network filtration mechanism. I've described, so my philosophy on managing that giant pile of stuff that's coming to you every day is I generally treat it like a greedy algorithm based on my interest as well as my aptitude or like the relevance for what I'm trying to do. And as we both know, a lot of the time greedy algorithms are not optimal, but they are efficient. And what humans need more than anything is efficiency, because that extra space in our brain is very valuable, right?
Yeah, right. You can burn a lot of cycles trying to make decisions rather than actually doing the work. Yeah,
precisely. But the interesting thing about what you're describing with your network is that you have more information to feed to that greedy algorithm. So if your network is directing you in a way where you're like, hey, this is definitely going to be valuable to my work based on what my peers are saying, that to me is a really cool addition to that equation. And I think I need to definitely improve my network in terms of data scientists that are working more on the cutting edge, because that's, most of my network is more on the influencer side or the creator side. Right. Very, very cool.
The other thing is a lot of times I'll print out a paper and it'll go into a stack. And then a couple of years later, I'm like, I'll finally get around. Like, so there's some really cool ensembling methods that I've looked at that I'll get around, and maybe they may or may not pan out, but they haven't caught on, but I still think they have enough promise that eventually I might actually get to them and give them a try.
Interesting.
But
So like
that's
the
to your
to-do
point
list
about
sort of.
it's actually not a to-do list. It's like a wanna do list.
I like it.
Like with ensembling, greedy methods get you pretty close. But I wonder if this one can get a little bit closer. And so it's like, if I get some free time and want to do something, I'll jump on that.
This episode is brought to you by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Z is specifically made for high performance data science solutions, and I personally use the ZBook Studio and the Z4 workstation. I really love that Z workstations can come standard with Linux, and they can be configured with the data science software stack. With the software stack, you can get right to work doing data science on day one without the overhead of having to completely reconfigure your new machine. Now back to our show.
Amazing. Well, I apologize. I keep interrupting your life story here.
Well, no, I mean, it's so the Kaggle competition, I started competing literally in every Kaggle comp. I was just obsessed, not because, not obsessed in a bad way, obsessed in a good way, because it was a very virtuous cycle. I do a Kaggle competition, do a little bit better, do another one, I did a lot better. Like I placed 32nd out of 1,000 people. That was really encouraging to me. And the better I did, the more I'd want to study and learn and see what was out there. So it was a really good virtuous cycle for me. I was still in industry. And after about 3 years, I thought, I'm starting to actually know what I'm doing. And tried to do some work within the company I was working for. Just was not working out. It's like one of these companies that was way behind the curve. Great company, just didn't have the talent, didn't know they didn't have the talent in terms of, kind of where I was when I joined that first competition. Just a complete blind spot to what could be done. And that's when I started looking kind of outside. And that's an interesting story too, because I'm sure like many people, the fear factor, grad school, 15 years of manufacturing in different roles, not really keeping up technical skills, and then learning this brand new skill and trying to get a job and potentially at the cutting edge was pretty intimidating. And it wasn't all success out of the box. My first job interview, went really well. And then they asked me a pretty simple question about object orientation in Python. Completely flubbed it. I should have known it. I just choked, flubbed it. Interview, that was it. And it really started to question, can I do this? So, over time, started doing well enough in Kaggle competitions consistently that I had companies reach out to me. In fact, I did one, it was a vision competition. It was a startup in San Francisco, said, hey, we saw that you were 15th on this. You want to interview? I'm like, I'm not really a vision expert. And they said, yeah, but you got 15th in a Kaggle competition.
Yeah.
I'm like, thought, maybe I do know something. And, it was kind of a confidence booster, and looked at a few other companies, and for a number of reasons, they just didn't pan out. And then it was in 2017, on my birthday in April. I was having dinner with my wife and my daughter, and I got a text. It was from Anthony Goldblum, who founded Kaggle. He said, hey, you probably heard we were acquired by Google. We're expanding our team. Thought, you want to interview. Because I not only had I competed and done well in Kaggle competitions, but I was very active in the community, which if I'm going to recommend anyone the plug to be active, be a positive contributor. I wasn't very good at teaming up with other people. A lot of people did really well at that, but I was very good at connecting with people on the forums and answering questions and just being part of the community. So it wasn't necessarily my awesome data science skills, because I still was fairly fresh, but it was just the demonstrated ability to be kind to people, to connect with people, to help people, right? It was that kind of pushed it over the edge. So I read this to my wife and my daughter, from this email from Anthony, and my 16-year-old daughter says, that sounds like a scam. I just delete the email. So it was kind of a funny moment. So yeah, so I went through the process. Again, extremely intimidating to go through the Google process. Anthony assured me that there was this book that you could read that would help you. It was, on the 700 page cracking the coding interview. And yeah, I spent a lot of time working through that, stressing about it, but it turned out okay. Turned out I completely over prepared, which is a good thing.
It definitely helps to have a request or a call to action from the CEO of a company that you're applying to.
Yeah. Let me tell you a funny tangent, a story about, in the industry I was working in prior to that. At the time, some of the larger software vendors were coming out with their, turnkey machine learning solutions. And they were working with the companies purchasing. One of the things, company had tens of thousands of vendors, and they wanted to be able to predict whether these vendors would have some sort of issue, financial issue, or some other issue down the road. And there was to be qualified as a vendor, this huge kind of like survey that they had to fill out with different information. And I said, well, maybe we can use all this survey information and predict based on this which of the vendors are going to have problems. So they put all of this into this software and they predict. And sure enough, they were able to predict with 100% accuracy which vendors were going to have problems down the road. The only problem was it didn't do good on future data. And it turned out that they had taken the vendor ID and used that as a feature in the model training, which turns out to be very good if you're predicting on the scene data. And I bring that up as a way, obviously they learn quickly and fix the problem, but a lot of the traditional companies, just things that we take for granted in the data science and machine learning world, they really struggle with. And so one of the reasons all of the Kaggle competitions that I've been in, it gives you this experience, like almost brutal experience. Right, the first time that you overfit the leaderboard and you drop 85 places or 800 places, you learn a lesson, right? Yeah,
I learned that lesson. So I had a very similar experience to you when you entered your first competition. Every year I enter the March Madness competition, and I'm like, I've got this. I have a lot of experience in sports. I'll team with some friends who also have this good experience. And this year we overfit pretty bad. We had if we used one of our models that was more generalized, we would have been in the top probably 5. And we used the other model that was not, and it was a huge mistake.
So I have to ask you, how do you overfit the March Madness? Because typically people overfit by the leaderboard, the public leaderboard. Were you using that and using that as the feedback into your model?
A little bit, yeah. We just used a significantly more complex model, an ensemble approach that was probably more sophisticated than we really needed. I mean, the more generalized model that we used performed significantly better.
So painful, but also a good lesson. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and also a fairly risk-free lesson.
Yeah, and I will say that March Madness, the data, the sample and the outcome is relatively small and quite random. And so I don't feel as bad about that specific event. If it was one that was I felt less chance-induced one, I would have felt significantly worse. So, from what I understand correctly, you've achieved Kaggle Grandmaster status before you landed your role at Kaggle. What is that process like, and how would you recommend someone approaching Kaggle that maybe wants to aspire to that, but that feels so far off to them? That feels like this distant aspiration.
I love that question, and I think, at least for me, the answer is super easy, is don't approach Kaggle as a way to earn money. Don't approach Kaggle as a way to earn a gold medal, to do well on the leaderboard. Approach Kaggle as a way to improve your skills. And if you do that, the other things may fall into place. But if you chase whatever position, the money, you're actually more likely to go on a path that is less optimal for you to develop your skills. And anyone who says, oh, I want to compete on Kaggle professionally and become a professional Kaggler. So if you're good enough to win a Kaggle prize, you are skilled enough to make far more money in a vocation not winning Kaggle prizes, right? That skill level is extremely well compensated, which is why people often want to do well. But you can't shortcut that learning mechanism. One of the challenges I had with Kaggle was there were always more competitions that I wanted to participate in than I had time for. And usually I was competing in 2. Sometimes I would try to do 3. 3 is unhealthy. You can't do it. So 1.5 to 2. And I would always choose the one that I felt like would stretch me and teach me the most. There was a time where I wasn't doing anything with neural networks and okay, it's time to enter an image competition and start to do well on that. So I think it's most important for somebody to identify where do I want to be? Where are my gaps? What are the steps? Avoid the competitions that don't get you there. Like, it's much better to enter a $1,000 prize competition that gets you closer to your goals of where you want to be in terms of learning than to enter a $100,000 competition that doesn't.
I love that so much. And I see so many parallels to the journey, for example, with content creation. If you're starting to make YouTube videos with the idea that you're going to make $1 gazillion, it's probably not going to happen. You're going to get burned out because you're focusing on the income or whatever it might be, instead of focusing on your enjoyment of the process, the stories that you're telling, and the quality of the content, and trying to improve in that way. And I love that you can see these things I have a lot of crossover in my YouTube content and the data domain, obviously, but to me, that might even be something that's bigger than just the data domain. That's a sort of perhaps even a life lesson where if you're focused on the process and what you get out of the process, which is education and learning and fulfillment, then usually the results that you want or that you might have hypothetically wanted come in the longer run anyway.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think it's important to remember, I was Kaggling for 5 years before I got a job in data science. So this wasn't, an overnight, I just decided I wanted to do this. So I'm not magically talented. So we're at the Kaggle Days Championship. Everyone in the room is, far more talented than I am. And I'm glad I'm not competing against them. But early on, I decided, okay, I'm not going to outsmart the top Kagglers. Again, this was, when I was competing. I'm not going to have more resources than them. So I just have to be willing to do things that they're not willing to do. That's the only thing. Like, my actions are the only thing I'll be able to do. And so what are my actions? My actions are make sure I'm just systematic about I'm going to learn how to ensemble. When I need to cross that bridge, I'm going to learn everything I can about ensemble and get all of that experience. All right, okay, this is a problem that's online learning. All right, I'm just going to methodically learn everything I can about that. So that was kind of my strategy.
I really like that. That's something I hadn't heard before. So the things that you're doing, you're not necessarily doing each competition for that competition. You're doing each competition for that competition and the next competition in that genre with that similar approach. So you're really focusing on compounding your knowledge over time rather than just learning a skill and forgetting it, which I'm definitely prone to do. I really enjoy that approach. To me, that's something that almost anyone can take away from, is that this isn't a sprint. This is more of a marathon. And if you do the hard work at the beginning, if you really put in your time to understand a concept, you'll be able to pick that concept up again in the future and expand upon that concept in a fairly elegant way as well.
Yeah. And the other thing that comes along with that is compounding takes patience, right? And there are a lot of people like, I've had people say, oh, do you know anything about crypto? I heard you can make a lot of money. I want to make money in crypto. Yeah, actually some people make a lot of money in crypto. I wouldn't recommend it as the way to build your wealth. You're young, you've got compounding working for you. So here's what I would recommend. Live below your means, put money away, do that consistently. You'll make, on average, more money than all of the people that are trying to, kill it in crypto right now. Now, there may or may not be good sounded financial advice. I'm not a financial investor. I am not giving financial advice on your podcast. But I will say in terms of learning, that concept is a very effective strategy, and I like the way you articulated it.
Yeah, I know Abhishek Thakur posted a YouTube video recently where it was something crazy, like learn data science in 30 days, the secret hack, and it was just a blank video. He loves trolling people like that. But the video got a ton of watches early on because, I mean, that's what people are interested in. People aren't interested in hearing, you can learn this field in 4 years and it'll be difficult but really rewarding and whatever it might be. They want it now. And I think that mindset is something that successful people have thwarted. They realize that I'm a huge believer that success can come faster than you originally think. You can do so much more in 2 years than you think is possible, and you do so much less in like a week and a half than you think is possible, right?
I agree 100%.
And that time distortion is something that once people understand that concept and they say, I'm going to dedicate to X amount of time to actually a realistic amount of time to tackle this domain, that's when massive change happens, especially in this domain.
Yeah. And right. And just to circle back on that again, I wasn't necessarily a rock star, right? Wasn't some person killing it. It was just,
I think you're a rock star.
Well, diaper manufacturing, and just decided I was going to put in the time. And so that's why I say, for the people that are, I'm not sure if I can do this. Yeah, if you enjoy it, which means you're willing to just do it consistently and do it over time, I think you'll make a place for yourself.
I love that. And, so let's switch gears a little bit. You did mention the diaper manufacturer.
I do. I love manufacturing, and diaper manufacturing is super interesting. Like, look it up on YouTube and you'd be like, wow, your mind can't comprehend all the technology that goes into making a diaper. It's kind of exciting. So
I did hear some rumblings of a poop fart classification. Can you tell me a little story about that?
So there was one time that I was asked to look at some data, and it was data that was, how can you tell from sensor data whether somebody has defecated in a disposable article or if it's a fart. Now, you think, well, that's easy. Well, no, it's not necessarily if you have a very low cost sensor. So how do you do it? So I was actually asked to look at the data on this.
Hopefully not too close at the data.
Well, fortunately, it was just the data, not the raw data. It was the collected data. It turns out you can do some things like, it turns out some lags in how things spike versus persistent measurements react can help you classify. But here's the funny thing. All of the early data projects that I got involved in, every time somebody says, hey, we're looking at solving this problem, I could literally look back to a Kaggle competition I had done within the last 2 years and go, oh, right. I did a competition that was kind of like this. It was like an epilepsy signal detection. It's like, oh, right. Now this is signal data, so I can just use the same tools that I used for that. I don't want to sound like I'm advocating for Kaggle too much, but I am.
It's okay. You're allowed to.
I'm allowed to.
We're big Kaggle fans here.
The reason I love Kaggle so much is it gives you just these multiple exposures to different domains, and you learn to look at problems in terms of the data and not the domain necessarily. It's like, this is signal data. It doesn't matter if it's an EEG data for epilepsy. It doesn't matter if it's a poop fart classifier. It's like, how do I process signal data? Some of our more interesting domain-specific competitions have been won by Kagglers who knew nothing about the domain, like competing with people that were in the industry because they approached the problem, what is the data, and so what's the method I need, what's the nonlinear fit that I need to best model this data.
Yeah, if you abstract it away, it is almost a little bit like transfer learning. You have these models that you've built that can be generalized, and then that are more generalized, and then you specify them to a specific use case. I personally do that with, for example, I always just import the same notebook when I start a project. It's as simple as that. I have all this code that I know is going to work. It does the EDA that I want for almost all tabular data, at least. If for image data, I use a different one, but I have to make some slight tweaks and it works. It saves you time. But that is the artifacts that you build as a data scientist. That, in my opinion, is part of who you are as a data scientist, right? The work you've done, the things you've built, the things that you can reuse, they add to your skill and ability over time. They become part of your skill. And I think people don't realize that. They think that as I am right now, even without my computer, that's what makes me a data scientist, what's in my head. And I'll be the first to tell you that is not what makes me a data scientist. Everything that I built, the infrastructure that I made for myself, the tools that I use that I'm comfortable with, everything else is what makes me more a data scientist than anything that's in my brain.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I'm a serial hobbyist. Currently, the last few years, my pandemic hobby has been knife making.
Oh, wow.
And I don't do the forging. I do like stock removal, but the people that do forge, they make their own tools. And people that forge have a lot of different tools for different, so that's kind of like the artifacts you make as a data scientist. You figure out how to do something, you figure out what works well, you have that artifact, and that builds your tool chest in data science. I can share a couple other just fun anecdotal stories.
Please do.
Early meeting I was in, meetings going on, we have all this data, we want to use the tools of big data, analyze this data. The meeting's going like 45 minutes into the meeting. I said, how much data are we talking about? Says, oh, hang on, let me open up the Excel spreadsheet. And it was like 6,000 rows of data. Then you have to politely say, you may not need a Hadoop cluster, or we probably can do something a little simpler. Had somebody wanted to do a predictive model to predict a certain outcome, binary outcome, and provided the data. And I said, where are the labels? And the answer is, if I had the labels, I wouldn't need the predictive model.
It's funny you should say that. I had one of my first internships, we had this issue where I was trying to build a classification model, and the classification model was, I think my NDA is over. So the classification model was based on if we should tear down train engines or not, like take them apart, clean them, whatever it might be. And what we were trying to predict was, when we should do this full teardown. And the way that they were doing it before is this guy would look at it, like hit it with a hammer and be like, well, we should tear this down. And then they wanted to improve the model that they were building. And the only data that we had was from this one guy. So the best that my model could possibly do was recreate what this guy has done, because he's created the labels. And so we're in this feedback loop of like, how do we evaluate if we should do this? How do we retrain it if this guy isn't there? And I'm also building this model to, in theory, also replace this guy's job. So as an intern, it was a pretty bad situation to be in, where I'm either building this model to replace this person's job, and I'm also training it only on the data that he is providing about if the engine that is good or not based on one of these. And so you run into a lot of these in industry where you're like, the problem isn't how well we optimize it. The problem isn't how well we do XYZ. It's a problem with the problem statement, or the way that the data is framed, or the amount of data that we have, or some of these other things. And that one, my entire career has given me a chuckle.
So let's turn this conversation into something practical for data scientists or aspiring data scientists. And I think all of those have the same lesson. Most data science does not need to be on the 3 decimal place cutting edge of precision accuracy, right? Most data scientists is you need to have a good broad exposure to different types of data. What are the traps and pitfalls that you might fall into? But then I think all of these stories actually highlight another critical skill that isn't talked about enough, is you need to be able to communicate to people, often senior people, why something just won't work. saying, well, no, that's stupid. Of course you can't model without the labels is not an effective way to communicate. It's the correct answer, but it's not an effective way to communicate. And I think that's another way that data scientists can differentiate themselves, not necessarily keeping up on all the data science, but learning how to be better communicators, learning how to do better visualizations, learning how to be more persuasive. A very common question I got before I joined Google was, what's the difference between machine learning and statistics? Most people don't know how to answer that in a way that a non-data person or data science person can understand easily. And I would recommend anyone who's listening to this podcast, think about it in your mind. How would you answer that? And how would you answer that in a way to be effective and persuasive of why maybe you need to use machine learning? What's the difference? You say, oh, it's just better. It's just newer. It can do big data. It's not a persuasive answer. So the communication piece, probably should find somebody who's really good at that and do a podcast with them.
Well, I think you're pretty good at that part.
Oh,
I won't lie to you. And you brought up something that I had never thought of before. And the communication is not about the yeses. It's about the nos, right? It's about when there is discord or disagreement. That's when communication really shines. It's not about just being nice to people and creating this good image. It's how do you reconcile when things don't go correctly or the way you want, or you're not getting exactly what you want out of a scenario. And thinking about it that way, it cuts through a lot of the noise of the communication skills and the things around that sphere. And maybe that will help simplify communication for a lot of people. Is how do you handle things not necessarily going your way? How do you articulate that things will not work out? How do you reframe a situation if someone doesn't understand what you're saying and are disagreeing with you or not cooperating or just don't like your model results?
Yeah. Well, in the pre-Google world, I was doing some work with a research team and using XGBoost, getting good model results. And there was a statistician that was a couple of years away from retirement, probably a little threatened by the whole machine learning thing. I was like, oh no, that won't work, because the way XGBoost, the way it handles zeros isn't statistically robust. Well, the management was all worried this method didn't work, but I actually did not know how to communicate. I didn't know how to respond to that correctly. And it was kind of an awkward situation. I'm like, no, trust me, it works. That wasn't persuasive. So that was a time that I was frustrated that I wasn't able to articulate a fairly complicated, potentially complicated topic to people that weren't data savvy. Eventually, I was like, I did the smackdown. All right, here's what we're gonna do. He can have his model, I can have his model. We'll get new test results, and we'll see which model does better. That's what it came down to.
Well, to be perfectly honest, that works.
It does.
I find that in the world of business, everything is about expected value, in my personal opinion, and I think in a lot of people's opinion. And when we lose sight of expected value, we get into robustness, we get into like statistical significance or whatever it might be. We forget about the different options that we have in business. Like, we can afford to run 2 campaigns until there is statistical significance, right? We can afford to test things and experiment. And a lot of the times we run an experiment not long enough, for example. And it's like, well, I mean, let's just keep it going. If one is making more money than the other, why would we not just stick with that one, at least in the short, medium term? It doesn't cost us more to do one thing or the other. There's very rarely black and white scenarios like there is in research in the business world, which I think is something, again, a lot of us sort of forget, particularly more traditional statisticians, which is why I guess their titles are getting changed a lot.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah.
Amazing. So obviously we're here at Kaggle Days, at the World Championships, as a matter of fact. What has your experience been so far? What are you most excited to see? And, maybe what are you expecting out of this?
Yeah, easily, it's just getting to meet the other Kagglers, right? Some that are meeting for the first time, some that are longtime friends. But an advantage of the connected world is that you can connect with people all over the world, right? That's awesome. But then there's also this gap where you don't actually meet people. And for whatever reason, I don't know if that's going to change in a few generations or if that's something that's super hardwired into humans. Just being able to be face to face, have some food together, laugh together in person is very meaningful. So yeah, just getting to meet all of the people that are here, having some laughs, some trolls, some jokes, some stories. Right, the war stories are always fun. It still is humbling to me to see how good and accomplished a lot of the Kaggle Grandmasters are. All of the Kaggle Grandmasters, but particularly the ones that are here. I learn all sorts of things from them. I was in one of the workshops yesterday and my foot was twitching because I'm like, I got to enter one of these competitions. Oh, I can't. Okay. Maybe I can take like 3 months paid time off and enter the competition. It's really fun. It's like I said, it's a good format for people that like to improve themselves and do it with others. But anyone who's been in the Kaggle community long enough knows that it's not a super toxic, hyper aggressive. People are helping each other. Like, people still want to win and do their best, but the amount of knowledge sharing that happens, hosts that come to Kaggle say, well, wait a second. Why are people sharing what they've done in the forums before the competition ends? This is what Kagglers do.
Yeah, and I'd say, why are you complaining about that? It means all the solutions are going to be better.
They're just confused because if you think about most corporations, you have all these silos that are competing against each other. And one of the most frustrating things about trying to be a data science in a large company is this person owns this data, this person owns, you need all of the pieces and they don't want to share or no, they got to, have control over this. And Kagglers are just very, very open. So being in a room of all of these awesome people is my favorite part.
I love that. Well, we talked offline a little bit the other night about how in sports, that data is very closed off. Individual teams, there's a competitive advantage that comes into play. And so they have very siloed data teams from one another, from other teams. And there's massive protectionism around the models and the data that's used and all these things. And I think that personally, that really hurts innovation in that space. And it's really cool to see the exact opposite of that happening here, where there's so much sharing of information, there's so much sharing of knowledge. You're getting solutions that are so much more advanced than in these domains that are a little bit more siloed, that it's just overall generally better for the field and for innovation and for learning. And that's something I'm excited to see Kaggle perpetuate. It's just an amazing thing to me.
Yeah, it's better for the field. It's better for the individual.
Absolutely. Walter, those are all the questions that I had. Do you have any final thoughts? Is there a way people can find you on social media or on Kaggle?
Yeah, at Kaggle, I'm Inversion. That's my username, kaggle.com Inversion. And Twitter, I'm at Walter Reade, Walter Reade. And yeah, just reach out. I'm pretty approachable and don't mind people connecting with me. LinkedIn, I don't use LinkedIn a lot. I don't get it, but it seems like everyone else is using LinkedIn. You can definitely connect with me, but just, let me know how you connected with me, like from this podcast or otherwise. And
always collecting data. I love it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it also helps me know because I'm like, if it's just a random person, but it's like, oh yeah, somebody that is connecting through this, it's like much easier to do the connection.
Amazing. Well, everyone, I'll leave all of Walter's links in the description below. Thank you so much again for the time.